This is Jeff Chrisman, and I'm very joyous and extremely grateful today to have the opportunity to be sitting with Dr. Frances Yahia. Thank you so much for being with me today. I really appreciate this.
Thank you for having me, Jeff. This is wonderful.
Absolutely. I've had an opportunity. We were talking a little bit before we started recording, and I had mentioned to you that I had an opportunity to read some about you, and I realized that reading to me is very different than actually hearing it in a person's own words and having it in the form of a conversation. So I really honor your willingness to be here today to share some of your journey. And I wanted to take a moment before we started. I really do actually want to honor the work that you do with clients to help restore self-love and self-empowerment and self-worth. And also the work that you do helping liberate people and empowering them to liberate themselves from dependence on religion, cults, or gurus, or any types of spiritual coercion. And I certainly do have, some of my own experiences, not that this is about me, but that certainly does intrigue me very much. And so I definitely am very excited to learn more about how this journey started. So what I'd like to do to begin with is, if I could, just ask you what this work and ultimately what your life journey mean to you at a deeper level.
Sure. So that is actually my larger mission, is to help people, what I call the game of dethrones.
Yeah.
Which is to help people dethrone any sort of pedestals, because pedestals at a deeper level indicate a savior archetype. And we are our own savior. And I grew up in a cult. And after I left the cult 33 years in, arranged marriage to the cult leader's nephew, I met another spiritual guru / teacher, not as terrible, but similar, on a pedestal. I had him as a savior. And when I finally left that entangled relationship, I went into a deep existential crisis because everything I had known was gone. So my roots were in an Afro-Cuban religion, a little different than, Christianity or Judaism, but nonetheless, the idea that there is something outside of oneself and not within oneself. So in my first existential crisis, I remember being in my house, and I was screaming, like that primal scream, like to the universe, to God, where are you? And this book from the Kabbalah tradition fell off the shelf. And I read a quote, and it said, "There is no coercion in spirituality." And at that moment, I realized I had never really known true spirituality. So I had components of a spiritual path, and I had been exposed at a very, very young age to very deep, meaningful spiritual teachings. But in terms of being a spiritual aspirant on a path, I realized that dependence on these cults and these gurus was really nothing what was going to lead me after reading that quote. So that started my real journey. And I started realizing that I needed to look within. So I was watching an astrology TV show, and I booked an appointment for the astrologer. And what was supposed to last an hour lasted about 15 minutes. And he told me one thing that I knew and one thing that I didn't know. He's like, "You'll be divorced." And I was divorced. And he's like, "You can be in control of your own life." And that's the difference between a true teacher and a guru or a cult or dependent on someone that you have on a pedestal. The true teacher really tells you that they're simply there temporarily to perhaps give you a teaching or guide you, but that it's your path. And I had never heard those words before, that I was allowed to run my life, that I didn't need an intermediary. And so inevitably, I signed up for astrology classes, which in my opinion is one of the most amazing self-awareness tools. Shortly after that, I was introduced to the Akashic Records, and that's when I really felt home. And I studied metaphysics, universal law, shamanism, you name it. I had been studying it most of my life. But now something shifted. I started applying the teachings. So the knowledge turned to understanding and then wisdom. And so that's what I tried to do with clients is I try to be a teacher on their path, but educate them that it's their path, that nobody deserves to be on a pedestal, that the answers are within, and that they're sort of, I have a 4-level stage of the subconscious and how the subconscious develops. And prior to taking even our first breath, we have everything we need to find our way in this world. So that was one of the gifts of working in the Akashic Records and working with clients for many years, was the development of this model, which is now what I use with clients. But one of the things that happened to me was I realized that I had to write the books that I needed to read, and that I had to be the teacher that I needed to follow. It wasn't external. It wasn't outside of me. It was always in me. And so that's what I tried to teach my clients, my students, that the answers are within. But we've been sort of given this framework that there's something external or lacking in us that we have to find outside of self. And I think it's extremely important that everyone realize that it's all inside. It's already in your story. It's already in you. By the moment that you're born, you have all the answers within. It's just like a puzzle trying to pick up the pieces and put together what I call your stone soup, to put together your own sort of ingredient of what you're here to do so you can follow your will and your purpose.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I really do deeply honor that. And I was wondering just if it was it a period of time for you to, for this to become more clear for you, that the answers that that a lot of us, I don't want to say just you, but that a lot of us seek externally, that they were really actually within you?
Well, I'll tell you that one of the best things of my childhood, and I think I'm lucky in this respect, I learned the spiritual teaching that I needed very early on. So this Afro-Cuban cult is more like a religion in the islands. My parents are Cuban, and it's a mythology-based religion. So I learned very early on mythology, symbology, which is a lot of the work that I do now. But my parents were the material arm of the cult, and the guru was the spiritual arm. And so at a very, very young age, I understood that spirit and matter were always together. And so it took me a while to really understand what that meant. But when I really grasped that teaching, that was the thread that I pulled, that all of my teachings and programs are based on. So we have 2 states of consciousness. We have an earthly state of consciousness, a material state of consciousness, our body. This is our low-level thoughts, our desires, and our low-level consciousness. This is unchangeable in ourselves. We cannot change that. Part of that is just acceptance that we are human and flawed and desirous and have low-level consciousness. That's the material aspect. And then we've got this spiritual or shamanic state of consciousness, which is sort of that higher calling. And I teach a shaman class, and I tell the students the definition of a shaman is a person who walks the worlds. And those are the 2 worlds, those 2 levels of consciousness. When I really understood that that was the underlying theme in every universal law, in every sacred text, in every mythology, in the hero's journey, in all of it, when I pulled that thread, that's when it really rang true to me and I really understood. And then from there, I built all of my programs and wrote my books and so forth. But that's a really important lesson. And that's what Jesus comes to teach and what Buddha came to teach. You know, Buddha refused the Buddha bowl, right? The rice. He thought he was going to reach enlightenment without feeding his body.
Yeah. And
Jesus teaches us the ordinary of a commoner and a man born in a manger, low-level consciousness with the divine, spark or soul. And that's what we're here to integrate. Those 2 levels of consciousness. And I tell clients, we spend 99% of our fire trying to change what is unchangeable. And it is everything that happens from conception to birth. So that's why I say we have everything we need by the time we take our first breath. We haven't even lived, and we already have all of the information we need. And that is a shared human experience. It does not matter anything after your first breath. You have everything in that sort of segment of time from conception to birth. And right there, you have your 2 levels of consciousness. When I really grasped that, then I knew I could figure this world out. Prior to that, I had no clue how to live in this world. And that was for me the change agent. At that point, I really understood that this was internal, but I was internalizing the teaching. So I had the knowledge, but I hadn't really the heart and the wisdom associated it. But that was the one thing from my childhood that it was almost like a veil that was removed that I understood. And when I really pulled on that thread, everything started to make sense. So I build everything I offer on that sort of concept that you need both levels of consciousness, and you're not flawed. You just need both in order to live in this world and do this work.
Yeah, that is so interesting, because I get this sense, and I don't know if it's a fair question to ask, but based on your experiences, and I definitely have more to ask you about, I'm very interested in hearing, how the work with other people came into being, and I clearly am very interested in that. But I was going to ask you, I'm wondering if, just based on your experiences from what clients share with you, I'm wondering about the connection between just the way that children, and I realize this is very general. I realize all children are raised, differently. All of us have a different experience. But is it something about how there is this, it's almost this agreement, I don't know if that's the right word, that there's something missing in us, and that somehow the collective consciousness or the group consciousness, or how we socialize and how we're acculturated in this part of the world, that does it somehow foster that sense of that we're lacking something? And I don't know if this is fair to ask this, but I'm just curious what your client
It's a fair question. And I actually think it's before the acculturation or the socialization process. So let me take you to the moment of conception. So whether we think of getting kicked out of the Garden of Eden, or Hephaestus, who was the only sort of deformed god that was kicked out of Olympus, in our collective unconscious, in Western culture, we have a myth that we buy into, which is we are broken. We are kicked out if we are broken and flawed and ugly and not worthy. So again, whether it's sort of, Garden of Eden or more Greek mythology going, pre-Christianity, there's this belief that we are not enough. So this mythology, we also see this in a mythology of Chiron, who is the wound or the abandonment. So what happens is at the moment of conception, we leave the universal consciousness. And at the moment of conception, in the marital bed, we inherit the limiting thoughts, the low-level consciousness of our parents. That is a contract. That is a preconception contract that is rooted in the law of vibration based on our previous karma and the consciousness level that we inherit or we enter into this lifetime. At that moment, we already feel broken and we're nothing, right? We were just conceived. During pregnancy, that low-level consciousness and those limiting thoughts get like an attached emotion. So now I was kicked out of heaven, Olympus, the Garden of Eden, and now I have to have a loyalty in order to belong to my tribe ancestrally. I'm going to be given an emotion. In my case, it was hopelessness. That emotion, every time it arises, with every time I feel that I'm broken or unworthy or abandoned, kicks in. And this is my fight or flight response and my emotional response. Then your birth, you get your body. Now you have your sins or your vices or your passions, your desires. All of that package before your first breath is why we all feel that we're broken or not enough. What happens is now from 0 to 7, so now society, family, culture confirms what was created from conception through birth. Now we have the story to support all of that desire, low-level consciousness, emotion, and impure thoughts or desirous thoughts. So it's the 0 to 7 that we get the story. That is a lot of the work that I do with clients. I help them unpack and own their story, but it's really prior. So this is an interesting part of my work. In the Odyssey, the Greek myth of the Odyssey, Odysseus, when he's on his way back from the Trojan War, he's in the bedroom with his wife Penelope. But Odysseus is in costume. He's dressed up like an old man. He's trying to trick Penelope to see if she had been unfaithful. And the only two people in the room and in the world that know that their marital bed is attached to the floorboard with an olive branch are the two of them. So Penelope tricks Odysseus into revealing that he knows that information. And she's like, oh, I know it's you. That myth, there's one sentence in that myth that changed my life and really is the foundation of my first book. What it says is you cannot separate the marital bed from the olive branch. The marital bed is the union of your parents, their thoughts at the moment of conception, their desires, and their low-level consciousness. You are the olive branch. You are the midpoint of those two people. And so our entire journey up at our first breath is to discover how to integrate the good, bad, and ugly of those two people. Now, we don't necessarily need to know them. This is all stored in our subconscious. But our subconscious or our shadow work is what's going to lead us to integrating individuation and wholeness. So everybody has that sentiment that they're abandoned or they're not worthy because of these myths. And then society, or 0 to 7, the family sort of confirms. Validate me by getting good grades or looking a certain way or academic prowess. And then we always feel that we're not enough or we're catching up. That's where the ego and the personality are formed. The ego and the personality are constructs to help us not feel different or separate, but they actually indeed make us feel different and separate. And so they're masks that we wear to not hide the wound that we all share, that we were kicked out of something, we were not enough something. When we individuate, we actually let the will or the purpose of life direct us. And then the ego and personality sort of jump on and they go on for the ride. But most of us, until we reach some point in our spiritual journey to go within, are letting the ego and the personality dictate. And that's why we constantly feel that we need validation or we're not enough. So we're all dealing with this same mythology. It's in our collective unconscious.
That is so interesting. I really appreciate you sharing that, because what's coming up intuitively for me, and this really everything that you just said really resonates. What I was going to say to you is that, when you're talking about 0 to 7, and that even prior to socialization or acculturation, I had a teacher many years ago, this is just coming up, I haven't thought about this in a long time, but he used a phrase, conspiracy of consciousness. And when he spoke about this, and I'm not speaking like it was some sort of evil conspiracy or anything like that, but it was essentially as benign, possibly. And I realize that some people take advantage of this, that if I pretend you are who you think you are, then basically I ask for that in return. So if I feel like I am broken, then I'm going to see that through the lens. I'm going to see everyone else through that lens, that, if I'm lacking something, I'm going to see that in others. And I was just wondering if that, based on your experiences in your work, that, and the other side of this is that that conspiracy of consciousness, that somehow the spiritual leader, the guru or the teacher or whoever the spiritual leader is, that they are ultimately that person on the pedestal because of that same conspiracy of consciousness, that they're only that person if we believe that they are, and that they depend on that. And there again, I shouldn't say depend on it, but that it really is the spiritual aspirant or the member of whatever group it is that makes the guru, and then it's both ways. The guru, if I believe that person has knowledge that I don't and wisdom that I don't, and they've got access to something that I don't, then that makes me someone who is not whole or complete. So I was just wondering, I know that was a lot, but I'm just curious.
No, absolutely. So let me kind of break it down. First, in terms of seeing the other broken because you're broken. This is a metaphysical law or universal law called the law of correspondence. As within, so without. So when something enters what I call my sphere of consciousness, I always break it down to see what it's mirroring in me archetypally. So if someone shows up, for instance, broken, that would be like a Chiron or a Hephaestus from mythology archetype. Then there's something that's sort of being awakened or brought up to my consciousness that I need to look at. That didn't enter my space accidentally, right? And so the use of that particular law is absolutely one of my favorites. Jung called it synchronicity, but it's actually a universal law. So as within, so without. But prior to that law, there's an even bigger law, which is the principle of mentalism that says all is mind. So our mind is creating all of this. In shamanism, we call this the dream weaver. I'm creating this dream, this conversation, for instance, right? So if everything is a product of my mind and my level of consciousness, that person isn't broken. I'm broken, and I'm projecting and reflecting and creating the dream onto, maybe because I want someone to save me or because I want to show up as the savior for that person. So depending on how it shows up. The other thing is the cult leader or the guru. These people prey on the fact that we perhaps don't have a family of origin that was supportive or a community that we belong to. So I love to share one of my absolute favorite myths. Hercules is the son of Zeus, and he's an illegitimate son. And Hera, who's Zeus's nagging wife, sort of kicks Hercules out of Olympus and says, you have to do these 12 difficult labors. If you manage to be successful, then you can come back and assume your rightful place in Olympus. And he represents our spiritual road. And I have a program called the 12 Truths to a Spiritual Path. And every philosophy, religion, tradition has these 12 built in somehow. I use them based on the myths. The third labor of Hercules, according to the way that I lay them out, is the myth of the Garden of Hesperides. And Hercules meets two teachers on the way. He's told to go get these golden apples. He has no clue where he's going, like many of us, right? We're aspirants. We don't even know where to begin, what to read, what to look at. We have no clue. So he's in the same boat. Well, he meets this old man. He's considered an old man. His name is Nereus, and he's sitting under a tree, and Nereus just nudges him in the right direction. And so he turns around and he's going in the right direction. On the way to the garden, he meets another teacher, Busiris. Busiris promises him the moon, the stars, everything. So of course, Hercules is like, great, this is what I need, right? The guru, the teacher who's going to teach me. Instead, Busiris ties him up, robs him blind, and leaves him for dead. And a lot of times, this is what happens. And unfortunately, many of us find many Busirises on our path before we find a Nereus or before we even know that we need a Nereus. And so, not to say that every spiritual aspirant needs to meet a Busiris, but we're sort of set up in our psyche for that, because even though I was born into a formal cult, our family is a cult. Our parents are the chief, right? They give us our thoughts, they give us our costumes, they give us our beliefs, they give us the rules, our values. And so we're primed to be set up to seek a savior, to seek a parent, to seek a cult leader, to seek a Busiris. And so part of the dethroning process, and in my model, I have what I call the Band-Aid approach: awareness, integration, and then do it different / dethrone your parents. In order to fully individuate, in order to fully be a spiritual aspirant, you need to dethrone your parents and identify what thoughts are theirs from the marital bed, the low-level consciousness. What are yours? What are their values? What are yours? This is the proper use of fire. Fire is the only element of the 5 that humans have control over. We have no control of the ether, of the air, of the water, or the earth.
Very interesting. Yeah.
And so if we don't learn to use our fire appropriately, which our parents do not teach us, of course, because we need to comply to their rules, right? Which is, of course, safety for us to not like kill ourselves or burn the house down.
Yeah.
We are all set up in our psyche to follow a guru, AKA our parents. So in my model, the first question of the 7, which is to no longer create dependence on anyone, is the thought, because it's an impure thought or a thought that's creating some conflict, representative of mother or father? Because every single person, place, thing, or situation represents your mother or your father. Because what we are trying to do in our psyche is return to the marital bed, mother, father, child, and rearrange that dynamic in a healthy way. And every single situation, every single person, there is no other in a person's mind but their mother and their father. And so when we can set it up that way, we can recognize that we're all prone to wanting to find a cult leader, a guru, a series. And that is scary, because we are all capable of falling into this, because we do want somebody to meet our needs. We want somebody to love us unconditionally. We want somebody to save us. And our parents did not do that for us. So we go out into the world like Hercules, finding that person, and anyone will do. Anyone will do.
Wow.
And that means that everything's externalized. When it's my job to meet my needs, my job to love myself unconditionally, nobody else's. And that's a hard pill to swallow.
Yeah, that's so interesting, because everything you're saying, and I know even in my early parts of my journey, I mean, everything you're saying, I'm as you're speaking it, I'm not trying to remember it actively, but it is definitely, I'm seeing parallels between as you're speaking of this, the stages of the journey, so to speak. I can remember even for myself that, even in terms of being a spiritual aspirant, that it wasn't, any guru that I thought was a guru or a teacher that I thought had all the answers. It wasn't even so much, I love how you say that it's also about getting that love and acceptance that we didn't get at home, so to speak, or growing up. Because I realize now that but this is very human, isn't it? It's not just about getting the spiritual teachings and the wisdom. It's also about getting that love that we're seeking, and that approval and that sense of belonging. And I guess the group really provides that, doesn't it?
And that's what they offer, right? They offer the group or the tribe, and it feeds into wanting to have those needs met. So there are 4 unmet needs that everyone has: safety and security, protection, validation, and love.
Oh,
and if I show up in a situation expecting you to meet those needs, I'm already putting you on a pedestal, because you're expected to save me. But when I understand that this is an inner process, that is not your job, I all of a sudden take control of my power. I take everyone off of a pedestal. Doesn't mean that I don't love people. Doesn't mean that I don't have healthy relationships. Actually, I have healthier relationships, because now I'm in charge of my free will, my choice, my consciousness, my fire. Now I'm individuated. Now I can actually be of service, because on the spiritual path, truth 5 is truth of individuation, where you own that fire, that free will, and that choice. On the opposite side of that truth is the truth of service. And so I have what I call a chocolate chip leadership theory, where you can only serve service as self, and self as service. So when I'm meeting my needs and love myself, then I can actually truly serve you. Prior to that, I'm asking you to meet my needs. I put you on a pedestal. I give you my power. There's no service. It's savior. Big difference.
And I wonder if in some ways, and I realize in some cases, I don't want to generalize. I don't know if necessarily all gurus or spiritual leaders, in terms of I know there's an issue, not an issue, but there's something about charisma. There is sometimes people who, for whatever reason, they make it so easy to hand over the power to them. Maybe not completely, but partially. I realize that every situation is different, but I really find that interesting that there is that, but ultimately we have to really decide. What I'm getting from you is that we make that choice ourselves to turn that power over, or to give them that fire.
Absolutely. And the charisma is an important trait, because charisma you're told what you want to hear.
Mm.
You're told, of course, that you're not broken, and you're not. You're told that it's your family's fault, or whatever the technique is, right? So it's something interesting when I work with clients. My college is called Hidden Truths. Some of my clients say it should be called hard truths, you know? So I'm sharing hard truths about how you lie to yourself, how your shadow is robbing your fire, how you're showing up in the world not really true because you're just trying to hide these passions, these vices, and these sins. And so my version of spirituality is not sexy. And right now I call it sticky note spirituality. A lot of what's being sold is sexy and what I call sticky note, like buzzwords. And it's not like that. This is a choice. When I teach the shamanic path, there's 12 totems that we do, 3 for each direction. The direction of the West is unchangeable nature. It's acceptance of your low-level consciousness, your desires, thoughts, and your desires, your flaws and judgments in your body, right? The South is where most people stay in relationships, trying to make good choices, deciding, and that's where most people spend their life. Fighting the West, the unchangeable, and maybe making some headway in the South. If you are really an aspirant, you're now choosing a direction of the East, which is to confront your shadow daily. And then unifying consciousness, entering the direction of the North, which is spiritual renewal daily. This is a daily choice, just like it's a daily choice to brush your teeth, to go to the gym, to exercise, to eat good foods. It is a daily decision that you make for spiritual renewal on this path. This is not an ending. This is not sexy, and it's surely not easy when you're truly, in the more advanced truths of a path.
Yeah, thank you so much. I really do appreciate this. And what I wanted to do too is kind of look back a little bit and and I started to say rewind, but I don't know if that's the right phrase or not in this case. But one of the things that I find very interesting that I would love to hear more about is, at the point, and there again, I don't know exactly where what point that you might start at, but it would be very interesting to hear, when you became aware, you began to be aware that there could be a different way, so to speak, and that there, all the things that you've shared, I'm gathering are a result of your study and your work and your own self-realization and self-liberation. And so it'd be very interesting to hear, maybe going back to that time, what that felt like once you finally realized that you could no longer live the way that you had, and maybe hearing, as you transitioned into working with other people, just anything that you might share about that experience of making that transition from someone who is doing the work yourself of everything that you've spoken of here. And then also moving into what it was like for you to actually, or what it was like to realize that you had something to offer that you could share to help empower other people and help other people liberate themselves and make that choice.
Absolutely. So by 2009, 2010, I had already left the cult, and I had learned astrology, and I was reading the Akashic records, and I started a practice, and my practice grew pretty quickly. I then incorporated shamanic healing and tarot and a bunch of divination techniques. And I considered myself at the time, this is how naive and innocent I was, to have a pretty perfect, close to perfect life. I was in a relationship where I was head over heels in love. I had this beautiful spiritual practice, these amazing children, things were great. And then reality set in. In 2016, I got my first bout of cancer. And when I was first diagnosed with cancer, I had done a retreat for ayahuasca right before that. And I remember in the first time you try ayahuasca, they recommend that you do perhaps 2 takes of the medicine. And my thought was, oh, I don't need that. I'm stronger than medicine. And I didn't realize at the time that was my shadow and my ego really strong, right? Because I struggle with pride and gluttony. Those are sort of my top 2 of my vices. So I didn't know this back then. And then I get diagnosed with cancer. But the day of the biopsy, the nurse takes me into the room and she's like, oh, you're going to hear, you're going to feel a pinch and you're going to hear a series of clicks. And then it'll be done. And I'm like, and she mentioned like the pinch might hurt. And my thought immediately, it's not going to hurt because I'm Francis, you know? So not only does it hurt, the anesthesia doesn't take. And a biopsy, they're like ripping tissue out of your, in my case, it was breast cancer. And I couldn't talk and I was crying from the pain. And the nurse says to the doctor, she's feeling it, she's feeling it, she's feeling it. And I went home that day and I hadn't gotten diagnosed yet. And I said, wow, I've got a lot of work to do. And then it clicked that the medicine in ayahuasca was showing me that same thought. I am God. I don't have pain. I'm stronger than medicine. I'm stronger than anesthesia, like all the prideful thoughts. So I didn't realize just yet. Then I got diagnosed and I was in the Akashic Records, and my guidance actually told me to go back to the years. I had all my sessions recorded. I record my sessions for my clients, and they told me to strip the recordings that my model would be in there of how to heal my cancer. That's when I wrote my 7 Gates, the first book. And it's 7 steps beyond self-awareness because it gets you to the root of subconscious. So that's where I understood that conception, pregnancy, and birth basically gave us all of the subconscious, and 0 to 7 was the story, that we were never loved unconditionally and our needs were never met. And it really started to make sense to me. And one thing I knew is that I would never, ever, ever be a cult leader. I knew that my mission in life was to help people detach or release themselves from coercion. So I was always wondering, why did I get this cancer? So I got cancer the first time. I wrote the book. I wrote a second book. Things were okay. Well, about a year and a half later, I got cancer again.
Oh my
Well, not
goodness,
only did I get cancer, it came back much stronger. My husband left me. My hair fell out. I lost my house. My kids all left to college at once. I lost all my money. I lost everything. And I'm like, wow, there is a very big message here. And I had studied biodecoding of illness. And I know that illness, because of the creation of the elements, I know that illness starts in the ether, in the air. So I had that understanding, and I had studied Ayurveda and Sankhya philosophy. So I knew that it was from my thoughts that my illness had been created. But this time it came back with a vengeance. I went into a severe depression for 3 years. I could not get off the couch. And I realized, and then the cancer came back a third time.
Oh my goodness.
Yes. So with 5 years, I was struggling with cancer, and I was sitting on my couch for 3 of those 5 in absolute devastation. I had lost my faith, my curiosity, my foundation, everything. And it dawned on me 2 big things. First, that I was mourning my unlived life. I was mourning everything that I had created, because we create our story from a victim stance, like Hephaestus, like Chiron, like getting kicked out of the Garden of Eden, that we need a savior. And so since I was looking for the savior constantly, even in the illness, in a weird roundabout way, I had to mourn the unlived life, which was a life, what I have now, something so beautiful as the hero of my story, and someone who's empowered and making free will choices. So I understood that when we choose ourselves, we must mourn. That's a big thing that's built into my program. When clients choose themselves, we must mourn, because we are not programmed in our psyche to choose ourselves. Nobody has that programming. That was one of the big realizations that I had during that time. And so I sat there and I just sort of mourned all the drama of my life, everything that I had lived or thought I was. And the other thing that it helped me to do was really see my shadow. I had no choice but to really identify with all of my sins, all of my vices, all of my low-level consciousness, all of it. And I sat on that couch and I owned my entire shadow. I came face to face with it. Those 2 things saved my life. And in June of 2020, I had my 3rd diagnosis, January, COVID hits. June of 2020, I wake up on the summer solstice and I declare myself cancer-free. And I call my doctor. I'm cancer-free. I get off all my medications, I change my diet, and I start writing. And I wrote 7, 8 books last year of
my goodness.
everything that I knew in terms of knowledge, but now I had lived with my heart. It had turned into knowledge and understanding to wisdom. And then I began walking the walk. And I really think that cancer came to confront the shadow, because if not, I could have turned into that exact cult leader that I didn't ever want to become. If I would not have confronted the level of pride that I had, Lord knows. And so that shifted everything for me, everything. And it was terrible, and I don't want to ever go back there.
Yeah.
But that helped me to confront and mourn all of that low-level consciousness, all of that pride, all of that shadow, everything that I deemed so, imperfect and flawed about me, and own it, and now live and walk the walk and really walk side by side by my students as a Nereus and not a Buceres, and it was all worth it.
Wow, I have to tell you, I just want to take a moment, and I so deeply honor this, what you have shared. This to me is absolutely enlightening. It is certainly impactful, and I would even use the phrase life changing. This is wow, and I want to say to you too that I wonder if in some ways that, and I know someone decides to become a teacher or someone that works with clients. I never thought about this until you just said that there also is that shadow that ultimately needs, I don't know if I should say needs to, I don't know the right word here, but until that is confronted, if that ends up being something that stands in the way of someone who can really walk side by, it's interesting. I think about a teacher, and there again, anytime I'm speaking about a practitioner, a spiritual practitioner, maybe unconsciously, I'm still seeing that as someone who has something that even if they're not acting like they have something that the person that they're working with or helping doesn't. When you said that walking side by side, that really was a very powerful visual, and it really, really intuitively came through to me as ultimately someone who, and I honor you for confronting that, and I have to wonder if that is maybe some of the most important work that someone who works with clients ultimately has to come face to face with.
The shadow work is the spiritual work. It's the 8th truth on a spiritual path, is a truth of the shadow. It's the myth of Hercules confronting the Hydra. And the myth of the Hydra is very powerful because the teacher tells Hercules 2 things. He says, we rise by kneeling and do not cut off the head of the Hydra because 2 will grow back. So in my thought process of, this isn't going to hurt, I don't need the medicine, my pride, whatever I thought I was, my Hydra heads were growing and growing and growing. And obviously, if I'm struggling with pride, there's not much kneeling going on, right? There's not much humility. So every spiritual aspirant, and I'll use the 12 truths kind of like a circle. So this is truth 8. And this is the last truth in shamanism in the direction of the East. Before you enter the North. The North is the direction forward. The North is the direction where every single day you decide, I am going to do this work. You cannot get lazy. So if you've reached the shadow, if you've really confronted your Hydra, then you're really dedicated, so to speak, on this path. So it's that sort of threshold between the shadow and then moving into walking this walk. And it's a lonely path. This is a lonely path because it does require you looking at everything all the time, right? So when Hercules confronts the Hydra has 9 heads. 1 head is a jeweled head. That is your main vice, passion, or sin. Mine was pride. My second is gluttony. Most people have 2. I call these bad bucket values. These are linked to your judgments. So when you judge someone, this is the easiest way to sort of identify what these are. When you judge someone, 99% of the time, you're going to be judging the same thing over and over. Let's say you judge appearance over and over, or money. Then you're seeing vanity and greed, for instance, right?
Yeah.
So I would see pride and gluttony repeated. We have all 9. So they're collapsed in the 7 deadly sins. Some are the 9 Hydra heads, but more or less in all traditions are between 7 and 9. And we have all of them, but there's two main ones. So when you see those judgments that arise that are linked to the desires, the reason you're judging in another is because you haven't confronted those hydra heads. So those start to make you feel, wow, I have such horrible thoughts, bad desires, and the shadow gets deeper, 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 more suppressed, and you try to hide it. When you use the law of correspondence and you say, as within, so without, the moment I judge something in another, immediately my hydra is being shown to me. And rather than try to chop off the head and to grow back, I simply kneel to that. And I simply admit that this is beyond me, that this is stronger than me because I'm human, I'm flawed, and I'm in the flesh. Now I can use my appropriate fire to decide, am I going to be uber prideful at this moment, or am I going to be humble? And there's an appropriate time for each. Low consciousness, high consciousness. Like, there isn't a right or wrong. This isn't, we always have to be high consciousness. That's like not even realistic. There are times where it's very appropriate to be prideful and speak up. So we have to learn first with the proper use of our fire, which is truth 5. By the time we get to our shadow in truth 8, really identify what our main hydra heads are. Once you confront your hydra and you decide every day you're going to confront your hydra, you're on sort of the return home of the path. And like Hercules, you're ready to assume your rightful place in Mount Olympus. And one of the things I tell students is it's spiritual renewal. Spiritual renewal is that decision daily, the truth of unity. It's the last truth on the path. That every single day you do 3 things that makes you say, I'm deciding to be a spiritual aspirant. The first is to read something contemplative. Contemplate something that someone has written or you have written, a quote. It doesn't matter. It doesn't have to be spiritual in nature, anything. Kind of see what the shared human experience there. The second is to have spiritual reverence to something. A reverence, a practice that is yours. If it's meditation, if it's reading the records, if it's reading a prayer, if it's opening sacred space, whatever that is for you, that's your private soul time. That's your renewal. And the third is to confront your shadow daily. Those 3 aspects, if you do those daily, you are committed to this path, no matter what else happens in your life.
Oh, thank you so much. What I was going to say is that oh my goodness, yeah, thank you. I really appreciate that. And to me that actually, as you were speaking that, I was actually even having just the experience of just going, beginning a day and going through a day and realizing how powerful that can be. I was going to ask you as well, as we're coming to a conclusion, if I could ask you, and I realize not necessarily just about one specific client that you've worked with or one specific person, but just in general, what it has been like to walk side by side with people, and how that has affected your heart and in your spirit and your life.
Absolutely wonderful. So one of the things is I always say I'll never stop seeing clients. Why? Clients are mirroring what I need to learn. We need a mirror. We don't have access to these shadow aspects of ourselves unless we have others. I don't have a spiritual teacher per se that I study with, right, other than books and sacred texts. So I had a friend the other day ask me, who is your spiritual teacher? And I said, humanity. If something enters my sphere of consciousness, whether it's from the news, whether it's a podcast, whether it's a client, whether it's a friend, that person, that humanity entered to teach me and to look at something. So I immediately look at that, whether it's a shadow aspect using the law of correspondence. So I'm in a constant sort of receiving mode. And my clients, I have to say, are my number 1 teachers, because nothing shows up in a session that isn't for me. The messages I give are the ones I need to get. So I always use that. And just this week, I wrapped up a year-long shaman program. And Truth 11 is the truth of service. And I had shown them a song and a video, and it was about humility, and I was crying. And you wouldn't think that a teacher teaching a class would be crying. And I said to them, I really struggle with my pride. There was a line in the song about pride and humility. And I'm like, wow, I really struggle with this. And then the next month, which we just ended, we closed up the year, I was in such a space of gratitude because preparing the class every single month allowed me to walk with them, teach them the ceremony, the rituals, the medicine, integrate the lessons. And if I don't have students that allow me to teach them, I don't get to learn. If I don't have clients that allow me to serve them, I don't get anything. So they are my gifts. That's been my experience. And I am on no pedestal whatsoever. I am right by, I don't even think I'm a step above. I am like right side by side. That
I love
like
it.
figuring out that same exact thing. And that client enters my space because I need that medicine as much as they do. And I am beyond grateful. And I've had, my loyals are my loyals. I mean, I went through a lot the last 5 years and my people have stuck by me. And I'm beyond grateful. Yeah, they've seen me go through some hard times and they stuck by. And I am really appreciative and I'm extremely grateful for the people that trust me.
Wow, thank you so much. I can't thank you enough for sharing all that you did and for spending this time. And I must tell you that everything that you've shared, and what I love is, and I remember you speaking of, the difference between knowledge and wisdom. And what I gather here is that you have synthesized, I don't know if that's the right word, synthesized or integrated. This to me feels like this is just something that is, it's something bringing together all of that knowledge and then distilling that into wisdom. In other words, but I feel like this all comes from a universal humanity and a universal human experience. Agreed. And at least that day, I don't know if that makes sense or resonates, but that's what's coming through very, very strongly.
Yes, that's beautifully put. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And once again, it was great to meet you. And I appreciate you taking this time today. It means a lot. Thank you.
Likewise. Thank you, Jeff. This was wonderful.